Welcome to Bedtime Whispers, where darkness comes to life and nightmares become reality. Great-grandfather, for a long time I didn't know if I should tell anyone. A lot of people wouldn't believe me or would have thought I was an idiot. But when my great-grandfather told me everything, I cried. I was afraid. I had a feeling close to a pre-infarction. I believed him wholeheartedly. But whether anyone would have believed me if I had wished to tell someone such a story is another matter. And he told me his story with one foot in the grave, lying in bed, breathing in the last oxygen of his life. His name was Arcady. You know, my great-grandfather. I knew him well, and, well, there was something about him that I couldn't explain. A handsome but broken watch. He had no sparkle in his eyes. A hard fate, you say. Worse, hell. And my great-grandfather talked about 1933, how in the summertime field mice and worms were a delicacy, and a piece of bread was a luxury. How commonplace it became to steal, conceal, and betray. It was a hard time, both physically and psychologically. At first, they thought they would die of hunger, but no, they survived. But something was permanently stuck in my brain. I knew that the cause of my grandfather's torment was somewhere among those memories, but I dared not press him. But my curiosity was pounding out of me, and Grandpa knew that. Here is what he told me. In March 1933, a rumor swirled into their village that a small tent had been built and carefully camouflaged 15 kilometers from the old warehouse in our ravine. And in it was, judging by this rumor, salvation with a big and gold letter. Grain, potatoes, carrots, nuts, beans, apples, and other foods that could save from terrible hunger. One problem was the weather. Everything must have gone bad after the winter, if at all, and no one wanted to go on an empty stomach. But Arcady went. He left his wife at home, and he had nothing to do. My two sons, Semyon and Rostislav, that is, my grandfathers, were already barely breathing. It was hard for them. They were just kids, and while Arcady wasn't home, and he was gone for days, Rostislav's mother had time to bury him right on the day after her husband left. The baby couldn't take it, and they didn't tell Shriomka about his brother's death. Mom lied that Rostislav let go for a walk for a long time. Who else was adequate? They helped bury. In general, not everyone was buried at the time. Sometimes families died and there were no friends left to bury them. Before, the only thing that saved us from the terrible stench was the winter, but now it took a nasty turn. There were fewer and fewer survivors every day. The houses were frightened away by the grim presence of death. The candles in the houses were still burning for 2 more days, and everyone already knew that there, on unheated stoves, the whole family was sick, and the disgusting stench would soon seep in and walk on the olfactory receptors of the living. And then Arkasha was gone, and my son was gone. My great-grandmother went completely insane. And by the way, the village did not know where her husband had gone. They thought he was dead, too. But then he comes back, all gray, can hardly stand on his feet, staggering. Not a man, just a shadow. He's got two bags in his hands. Everyone who could still walk in the village cried with happiness that evening. Arcady conscientiously divided the groats for 47 people. It seemed from outside that people had a holiday. Everyone received an impressive handful, and then the great-grandfather knew, right in the street, that his son, Rustic, was buried and fell to the ground like a rack. What do you mean, buried? My wife explained in a confused and painfully sad tone that she spent the day after he left her son in the other world. But how? He was looking at my fellow villagers and wife with eyes full of horror. He was following me all the way. He helped me to carry the sex. And just before the road to the village, he said that he would go the other way. I didn't know. And he sobbed loudly, tearfully. At this point in the story, I remember crying softly, too. But my great-grandfather wasn't looking at me. He was looking somewhere in the wall, and he recounted his memories dispassionately. And the villagers, of course, were not very eager to believe Arkasha. It was not customary to walk dead. One thing was troubling, though. He really could not carry the sex alone. Not Hercules. Thanks to the grits, we lived freely for a week and a half. We all ate a little. We tried not to be greedy, and they were afraid to die. Stomach often stopped accepting food as such, and when they ate too much, people suffered even more. And then it went completely wrong. Grandpa Arcady was patient. He didn't eat much, but he lived. And then Sanyan started complaining that Rustic wouldn't let him sleep. He walks around the room at night, sniffing loudly, and he doesn't talk. Sanyan told his mom and dad, and I was very surprised when my dad's hair started to stand on end. He started laughing and saying that dad's head was a broom. He left, standing beside dad, and Arcady, meanwhile, was looking just above his son's shoulder, in the corner, at the grim, to the point of losing his pulse. Familiar silhouette, little baby teeth peeking out from beneath pale lips, a slightly frowning forehead and closed eyes. And worst of all, he could see that under those pale eyelids his pupils were moving fast and fast. And then Sanyan stopped laughing, took off abruptly, and ran out of the house. Where he ran to, he never understood. Arcady stood there, staring spellbound at his son, who, by definition, could not be there. This nonsense was so painful to his brain that it darkened his eyes. It was inflicting fear, primal and unbridled, in such a way that there was nothing left in his body but that very fear. A complete stupor, the impossibility of the brain cells to work, and as if the soul had left the body because it was no longer listening. My great-grandfather had experienced everything, and a wild scream brought him out of his stiffness. When he blinked and looked into the corner again, there was nothing there. A junction of two walls, a layer of dust on the floor, and two footprints in the dust. One single piece of evidence that the vision was real. I wish there had been no footprints. Better that there was no sun either. If he died, let him go. And he didn't leave. And when the grandfather ran out into the street to the scream, such a picture opened before him that he was ready to howl with horror. His son was lying right in the middle of the road, unmoving, surrounded by a crowd of people arguing indignantly about something, and his mother, with her eyes terribly wide open, was standing over the body of her son, standing like an executioner, and in her hands she held a metal stick. Semyon died instantly. The blow struck his temporal area and simply shattered the soft tissue. That was the moment when the tears rolled down my cheeks for the second time. I hastily wiped them away, noting that my hands were all goose flesh. It was a nightmare story. I was getting more and more interested, but at the same time, something told me that what my great-grandfather said next would shock me even more. And I was damn right in my hunch. He had buried his second son with his own hands. Even the word hysteria does not convey the full bouquet of emotions that Arcadia experienced. He buried him next to Rostislav's grave, and then sat all evening and all night near these two graves. Rostik, what about you? It was you. Our mother couldn't do such a thing. He sat there repeating those words, and then he heard the words back. I don't like Semyon. Arkady looked around. The dusk obstructed his view, but there was certainly no one around. The words came softly and as if from nowhere. For what sins he had to suffer, my great-grandfather did not know. Nor did he know what sins his son had been tortured for, dead but disturbed. What was wrong? What did Rustic want? After all, even if he just didn't like his little brother, he would have fulfilled his mission in this world and calmed down. But he didn't stop visiting Arcady. He came every week. And Grandpa got used to it, because in spite of the fact that Rostislav was dead, he was always helping his father and mother. He would sit quietly and hum children's songs, as if he had never died. His mother saw Rostislav, too, but she denied him as a son. He was a stranger, not her son anymore. Something nasty, creepy, otherworldly. She asked Rustic directly what he wanted, why he wouldn't rest in peace. And the boy shrugged his shoulders. And so the years passed, and the hunger went away. My great-grandfather and great-grandmother survived that nightmare. There were about a dozen of them in the village, and salvation came for them. Army personnel were passing by, not even suspecting that somewhere among the corpse fumes there was still life. And they saw the living, and they took them all away. They were transported to the city and given one of the empty houses for temporary residence. Life was getting better. Only Rustic came again, despite the fact that the great-grandfather was already used to the company of his dead son. On one cloudy day he noticed something very interesting. Rostislav was growing up, not as noticeably as people grow up, but his body proportions were changing. His facial features were becoming coarse. A boy, a teenager, a young man. And then, a couple of years later, something quite unnatural happened. Arkady, coming home from work, heard crying. A baby crying. He went into the room and saw his slightly green-haired wife holding a pile of dirty rags. Rostislav standing next to her and smiling. Such a nasty smile on his face Arkady had never seen before. He stepped closer and saw a baby in the dirty laundry. A perfectly healthy baby. What kind of child is this? The question was appropriate. The question was meant for Rostik. That's your grandson. That's not my grandson. You son of a bitch. Go away. Go away at the last. Now it is. Now I'll go. There's nothing keeping me here anymore. Raise him. My Sasha. At this point my great-grandfather stopped talking and looked at me. At that moment I was already having a hard time digesting the information. It all sounded too wild. And then I got it. I am Yegor Alexandrovich. Alexandrovich, you know. I slowly rose from my chair, and I couldn't even feel my legs. I felt as if I had been hit on the head with something heavy, so that I was ready to faint. I asked my great-grandfather if my father knew that his father, my grandfather, had brought him from nowhere, and that he was already dead. And my grandfather gave me a short, affirmative nod. I raised him as my grandson. As Rostislav asked, "You may not believe me," but with these words, Arkady reached under his pillow and pulled out a small photo, blackened by time. There were 4 people in it: Arkady and his wife, my little father, and another man whose features were remarkably similar to dead now. The year on the back was 1963. I cried for the 3rd time. I don't know why. I don't fully understand what's real and what's not in this story myself, but my great-grandfather told it so convincingly that I never doubted him for a second. And then my father came into our room. Alexander Rostislavovich. He smiled at first, asking why my face is puffy, and then I watched as the smile hastily disappeared from his lips. They looked directly at the picture in my hands. You mean you already know? They looked alternately at me and at his grandfather, and I couldn't answer. My voice was gone, and I didn't sleep for 3 nights. It was a shock to me. Hell, you don't scare people at night, and you don't joke about it. And soon afterwards, Arkady died. The funeral took place in an extremely depressing atmosphere. No, you didn't get it. Not just like a funeral. Something was not as usual at a funeral. There were no tears, no hysterics, just silence. Not even a whisper. Or maybe I had gone deaf by then. There was only one fact that bothered me afterward. When I looked again at the photo my grandfather had given me, there were 5 faces. Who did the woman's face belong to? Which emerged years later. Thank you so much for your attention. Subscribe to the channel. See you soon.